Hey, everybody, it's Dr. Mary Crowley coming to you from Israel. I'm here up in the Galilee region, and we just got word yesterday that Ambassador Mike Huckabee had actually told all of the U.S. Embassy to leave. And I was given many texts by friends of mine, but God told me, He said, no, you have to stay. For such a time as this, have you and the small delegation. He actually called us a contingent, a warrior contingent of Esther's that are in the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We got here. I left Los Angeles on February 22nd, and I flew into Israel on the 23rd into Ben Gurion. For such a time as this has God called us to the kingdom. Now, let me tell you, this is a special broadcast. I'm recording it only, but we will upload it later to go live. But I want you all to pray because we are at an appointed time. Many of you who are listening know that God has called you, He has called me, He has called the ecclesia or the body of Christ for such a time as this. And we are here next week. We'll be celebrating Purim on March 2nd and 3rd, which is Tuesday and Wednesday of next, or no, actually Monday and Tuesday of next week. So everybody, we really need to pray. Today is the last day of February 28th. This might air like on the 1st. I'm not sure, but we're going to upload it shortly. But let me tell you this. I was awakened early in the morning. There was 2 fighter jets that flew overhead. I'm in this beautiful Airbnb. They call this house Bird Song because there's birds everywhere that are chirping in the land. The woman who owns the home is named Gila, and her husband actually was shot down in the Congo over 30 years ago when he was doing, help the refugees in the Congo. And so she's a widow of a man who fought for those who were refugees and impoverished. We are here in the land of Israel because God told us to come. The first time I came was in 2005. I flew in on the day before the Passover in April, and God did a significant thing at that time. I went 7 more times, so 8 times in total until 2013. So I have not been to the land in over 13 years. But God told me now that we needed to go. And for such a time as this, has He called us to the kingdom. It was also 20 years ago in 2006, on January 11th, that I was invited by my friend Karen Dunham, who actually has a church called Living Bread International Church. It was in Jericho. Now, Jericho is the oldest city and the lowest city in the world. Remember, it was the first city that the Israelites were told to conquer when they came into the promised land. And remember, it was at Passover time, and they were told during the ones that when they came in that they were to circumcise the males that had not been circumcised on the 8th day of the month. So we have to now believe that we are in an appointed season, in an appointed time, that this is an appointed season for such a time as this. So anyway, we are just moving forward. I'm doing this live broadcast right now for such a time as this to just have everyone pray that we are in a season that we need to now come before. We need to now come before the throne of heaven, and we need to appeal to the King of Kings and to the Lord of Lords on behalf of the Jews, for this is the time of Purim in the land. And if you remember the story of Purim, Esther is the 17th book in the Bible. And in the first chapter of Esther, King Xerxes had an incredible feast. It was 180 days, which means it was 6 months. And he was very festive. He was drinking wine, and he wanted to show how beautiful his wife Vashti was. So he basically said, go and call my wife. I want to bring her before the men and show all these men how beautiful my wife is. Well, at the same time, Vashti was having a party for all of the women in another part of the palace. But when Vashti was called, she did not answer. And what happened? The king became infuriated. and he didn't know what to do. But the wise men that were his nobles and the ones that gave him his sound advice told them, listen, if your wife doesn't come, our wives aren't going to come. So we need to do something. And one of the men said, let's banish Vashti from the kingdom and we will appoint another young virgin in her place. So that's exactly what happened. Vashti was banished, and they had this royal decree that went out throughout the whole land to bring forth a young virgin that would be appointed by the king to take her place. We are at an appointed time that when God calls us, we need to answer and listen to what God is speaking to us to do. And if we don't, God will bring somebody else to do what we have been called for this time in history. And so Mordecai heard about this. Mordecai now was the uncle of Esther. Actually, her Jewish name was Hadassah, but they called her Esther in Babylon. And so he told Esther, don't tell them that you're Jewish. Go into the king's palace. Haggai, who was the king's eunuch who helped oversee all of this big ceremony that was going to be going on, he goes, go and do whatever he tells you to do. So Esther went in with a number of other beautiful young virgins, and she did everything that Haggai told her to do. And after 12 months, basically what happened was it was time for Esther to go before the king. And she listened to everything that she was told to do by the king's eunuch, and she did. And when she went before the king, she found great favor. We are in this land right now because God has appointed us as Esther's for such a time as this to come before the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. As we flew in on Monday, I'm just side noting a little bit before I continue on with the rest of the story. As we flew on Monday to Ben Gurion, we were picked up by, my friend Dean Bai of Return Ministries. He's been in the land for over 30 years now. And so right now we're here in this place. I'm actually got some friends with me and they're kind of behind me, but listen, God told me to go and do this broadcast right now. And I didn't really tell anybody. I just got up early and I'm putting out this live broadcast because we are in a position for such a time as this that God has called us to pray. And so as we got picked up by Dean Bai, and we made our way into Jerusalem, we actually stayed at Christ Church, which actually has a hotel and beautiful grounds. We stayed at Christ Church for 2 days, and we basically went to many very significant spots. The place where Ruth and Boaz literally, where Boaz, basically came to Ruth, and because he said, I'm your kinsman redeemer, and her husband had died in the foreign land. She was a Moabite woman, and Naomi, her mother-in-law, she said to her mother-in-law, listen, where you go, I'll go. Where you pray, I'll pray. She said, your gods will be my gods and your people, my people. So Ruth, a Moabite woman, literally went with her mother-in-law back to Israel. And when she was in this place, basically, Naomi told her, Boaz is your kinsman redeemer. He has the right, because your husband died, he has a right to redeem your lineage. And that's exactly what happened with Ruth and Boaz. And out of that union and that marriage came their son Obed, who was actually in the lineage of King David, who actually out of that line came Jesus. See, so it's important that God is redeeming the time. He's redeeming the families. He's redeeming the bloodlines. He's redeeming it all. So no matter how dark it looks, everybody, for such a time as this has God called you to the kingdom. So we went to the very fields where Ruth and Boaz were when Boaz asked her to be his wife. And we also went to the place, and that very significant place that they believe that is where Jesus was born. Out in the fields, there was an incredible place that he took us to. I can't tell you where, but he said, this is most likely not in the place in Bethlehem. Yeah, this was near Bethlehem, but this was the place where the shepherds used to raise the sacrificial lambs for the sacrifices on the Temple Mount. So this was a very significant place that I believe that Jesus was actually born in this place. So we went to these very significant places. And then the next 2 days, we actually went to the Western Wall where we prayed. We went down into the Temple of David, where they actually have some new things that were just opened up. And what we did when we were here, we're still going to continue to do the rest of the 5 days that we are left. We are going to go to places, and we're going to pray, and God is opening up different portals in these regions, and we are decreeing and declaring Psalm 24. Lift up your heads, O you gates. Be lifted up, you everlasting doors. Let the King of glory come in. Who is this King? It is Jesus, strong and mighty in battle. Jesus goes before us, and he prepares the way. As he told me to come here this time, for such a time as this, we are not looking in the natural, but we are listening to the Holy Spirit telling us what to do. As I close out this short little live broadcast here from the Sea of Galilee up near where we are today, where the Mount of Beatitudes, where Jesus said his Sermon on the Mount, I'm going to be doing another decree from there in the next few days. But let me tell you this. Esther was chosen by God for such a time as this. What happened was there was this wicked ruler, Haman, that was being promoted. And one day he came in before King Xerxes, and Mordecai would not bow before him. Mordecai was the uncle of Esther. And when Mordecai would not bow, he got so infuriated that he went before the king and he said, King, there's a people group that's not listening to what you're saying to do. They're not paying their taxes. Basically made a lot of lies about the Jews and pretty much said these people need to be wiped out, need to be exterminated. And the king just went, okay. He didn't know that Esther was Jewish because Mordecai told her, don't tell the king that you're a Jew. And so Xerxes basically just said, okay, he put his king ring and he just stamped this edict, and it went out throughout the whole land that the Jews were to be annihilated. And so now Mordecai hears about this, and he rips his clothes, goes into fasting and mourning, and all the Jews in the land. And Esther hears about this in the palace. And she tells her maidservants, go and tell Mordecai to put on these clothes. Go tell him to do this. And so they went to him and they said, here, Esther is telling us, go and put on these clothes. And she said to her, no, you go back and tell Esther. She needs to go and appeal before the king. And she needs to go and appeal to him that what is happening for such a time as this, she needs to tell the king about what is happening. And so that's exactly what happened. Esther went, but no, at first she said, no, I don't want to go before the king. If I haven't been to the king in the last 30 days, I could be killed. And then this is what he said, Esther 4:14. Don't think because you're in the king's palace. In fact, let's go there right now. Esther 4:14, and it's 8 o'clock straight up here in Israel. Just as I looked at the clock, it's 8 o'clock straight up, which means new beginnings. And so Esther 4:14, Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace, you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made a queen for such a time as this? Or in some chapters or in some translations, it says, who knows if you weren't called to your royal position for such a time as this? And so that's what happened. Esther called her maidservants and she prayed and fasted for 3 days, and God gave her the plan. See, she could have rushed right in there. King, please help us. We're being exterminated by Haman. No, God told her now to fast and pray and wait upon the Lord. That is what we have been doing. We have been fasting. We have been praying, not in the land, but I fasted 7 days before I came here because I was directed by the Holy Spirit. And so that's what happened. Finally, God gave her the plan. And so God gave her the plan, and she went before the king and stood there. And now remember, she had not been called for 30 days. Unless he extended his scepter, she could have been put to death. But when the king looked and saw her, he found great favor. She found great favor, and he extended his scepter toward her, and he said, "Come." And she came. And he says, "What is it? What is it that you want, Esther? I'll give you even half my kingdom." Basically, she fell down at his feet crying and said, "Please, if it please the king, I want to invite you to a banquet today." She could have immediately told him what was going on, but God told her, "No, have a banquet for the king and invite Haman." And that's exactly what happened. She invited Haman and the king. The king says, "What is it that you want? I'll give you up to half my kingdom." And the Lord said, "Don't tell him right away. Have a second banquet." So she said, "King, I want to have another banquet later. Come back." And so, but at this time, this is where God set the stage for the greatest show on earth. Haman goes home and he goes, "I can't be happy until I see that Mordecai impaled on a pole. That guy's not bowing to me. He's got such mockery." He goes, "I want to kill that guy." And so they said, "Let's build a 75-foot pole, sharp pole, and impale Mordecai on this pole." So Haman goes, "Sounds like a good idea." And so he goes back. But now in the meantime, this is where God is setting the stage. Mordecai, several months earlier, had heard about a plot of two of the king's guards that guarded his royal palace. They basically were going to kill the king. They were going to assassinate the king. And what happened was Mordecai told Esther that basically these two guards were killed, but they pretty much brought the king. The king was saved because of this. And so what happened was that nothing had been done for Mordecai. Nothing was done for him. And so what happened was now King could not sleep that night. And he goes back and he starts reading the Chronicles and he starts hearing about what Mordecai did. And he goes, "What happened to this man who saved me? Has anything been done to honor this particular man?" And they said, "No." Now, this is where God set the stage. Haman was coming back and it was getting ready for the second banquet. And so now Haman comes back in and he is going to tell the king that he wants Mordecai to be impaled on this 75-foot pole right at that time. When God, all of a sudden, when the king Xerxes, I'm doing this on the fly, you guys. I'm up here in this Airbnb where I'm at with fighter pilots that have flown over earlier. We're at such a time as this. And so what happened was King Xerxes says to Haman, who was going to tell him, "Hey, I want to impale Mordecai on the pole." He goes, "What should be done to the one who the king wants to honor?" Now, he didn't realize the king was talking about Mordecai. And because of his arrogance and pride, he thought, "Oh, he must be talking about me." He said, "Put him on a royal horse with the royal, garments of the king and have him paraded throughout the town. And this is the one who the king honors." And so the king goes, "Oh, great idea." He goes, "Get Mordecai, bring him here right now." And to Haman's, whatever, he just, "Oh my gosh, are you kidding me?" So Haman had to literally parade Mordecai throughout the whole town and say, "This is the one who the king wants to honor." See, God is ready to turn the tables on the enemy. So Haman goes back home before he goes to the banquet, and he tells his family, his wife, and everything what happened. And they said to Haman, "Listen, this isn't going to be good for you. You're not going to win over the Jews." And he goes back. He basically goes back, and what happened was that when Haman comes in and they have the second banquet, and now the king says, "What do you want, Esther?" and she falls on her face. And that's when she tells the king what Haman's plot was against the people. He said, he wants to kill us, king. He wants to exterminate my lineage. And all of a sudden, the king got up. He was so infuriated. He goes out into the courtyard, and Haman falls on Esther, begging for his life. And the king comes back and he says, what, are you going to also rape my wife? And one of the king's, guards comes in and he says, Haman had erected a pole for Mordecai to be impaled on. And the king said, go and impale Haman on that pole. And so what God did that day is he reversed the tables on the enemy. And so now, as I close out today, we're going to go to Esther chapter 8. We're going to go to Esther 8, and I'm going to tell you how God is turning the tables on that day. And it says, on that same day, Xerxes gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. Then Mordecai was brought before the king, for Esther had told the king how they were related. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken back from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai to be in charge of Haman's property. Then Esther again before the king, falling down at his feet and begging him with tears to stop the evil plot devised by Haman the Agagite against the Jews. Again, the king held out the gold scepter to Esther. So she rose and stood before him. And then she said, Esther said, if it please the king, and if I have found favor with him, if he thinks it is right, and if I am pleasing him, let there be a decree that reverses the orders of Haman, son of the Agagite, who ordered the Jews throughout all the king's provinces should be destroyed. For how can I endure to see my people and my family slaughtered and destroyed? And so this is what happened. God reversed the curse. We are at this place in history, everyone. God is turning the tables on the enemy. This is not just about Israel. This is about the kingdom. This is about the Christians, the people, anybody who knows Jesus, that the enemy has tried to destroy, that the enemy has tried to resist, that the enemy has tried to literally take your portion inheritance. And God is getting ready to give it all back. And so now as we continue on, it says, then King Xerxes said to Queen Esther and Mordecai, I have given Esther the property of Haman, and he has been impaled on a pole because he tried to destroy the Jews. Now go ahead and send a message to the Jews in the king's name, telling them whatever you want and seal it with the king's signet ring. But remember that whatever has already been written in the king's name and sealed with the signet ring can never be revoked. So God is saying today, he's turning the tables on the enemy. God is reversing the curse of what the enemy has tried to do to you and your family. I have been brought to Israel, to this place for such a time as this, with a small contingent of warrior women that are now going to certain places. As we are standing, we're going to be going to Mount Carmel, where actually the whole, remember the prophets of Baal, we're going to be going up there in the next 2 days. We are going to be going wherever the Lord has telling us to go. Now, we do know that there's danger in the land here. We're not going to be foolish, but we are going to remember that if God be for us, who can be against us? And even as Esther said, if I perish, I perish. Because she was not called at that time to go to see the king, because she had not been called in 30 days, she said, remember, if I come without being called, I could be put to death. There is potential danger here, but let me tell you, if God be for us, who can be against us? The Feast of Purim was established in the land. It said it shall be, in fact, let's go as I'm closing out to Esther chapter 9, the very last, to Esther chapter 9. Sorry, guys. Esther 9. And it says, so on March 7th, the 2 decrees of the king were put into effect. On that day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but quite the opposite happened. It was the Jews who overpowered their enemies. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout all the king's provinces to attack anyone who tried to harm them, but no one could make a stand against them, for everyone was afraid of them. And as you go down to the end, these letters established the festival of Purim, an annual celebration of these days at an appointed time, decreed by both Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther. The people decided to observe this festival just as they had decided for themselves and their descendants to establish the times of fasting and mourning. So the command of Esther confirmed the practices of Purim, and it was all written down in the records. Even as what happened here over 2.5 years ago on October 7th, the people here in this land have been mourning. Many people have died. Yes, I know what some people are saying, what's happening in Gaza. There's a lot of misinformation that is being put out. Very important. Yes, I'm sure there's some bad things that have happened, but let me tell you this, I know. I'm actually with Dean Bai. His son-in-law Haim has been with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, for the last 20 years. Let me tell you what's happening. There is not a genocide going on in Gaza. I can tell you that. There's much false information coming through the media. Now, we're not saying the Jews are perfect. We know there's some. I think we're just hearing an alarm. Yeah, it is an alarm. Okay, everybody, we're going to have to go. But let me tell you this, everybody. Please sow a seed into what we're doing here. You can give marycrowley.com. Just do not be afraid. We're here in Israel, the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God is with us. Is God before us? Who can be against us? The alarms are going off. I got to go.